I've never been one to shy away from a bit of family drama, but I really didn't expect it to come in the form of a bridal shower gift. I'm 34. My name is Emily. I've been with my fiance Nick for 2 years, and we've been living together in a cozy little house on the outskirts of town. I'm not a stranger to family dynamics, and let's just say they've always been interesting. For some context, my dad, William, 60, married my stepmom, Stephanie, 45, when I was in my late 20s. I've never had the best relationship with her, but we manage. My mom, Heather, 58, has always been the more laid-back, open-minded one, though she and my dad have been divorced for years. Both my parents have always tried to keep the peace, but Stephanie and I have never quite clicked. Maybe it's because she's the type who thinks being helpful is often a bit more intrusive than necessary. So my bridal shower was planned by my mom, Heather. She's always been the one to step in and help with the celebrations. It was meant to be a fun, laid-back day with family and close friends, and I had a few close girlfriends over as well. It was an intimate gathering, and everyone seemed to be in good spirits. As I was getting ready to open the gifts, I didn't think too much about what might be in store. I was excited about the whole experience. Most of the guests had brought sweet and thoughtful presents, things like kitchen gadgets, cozy blankets, a couple of bottles of wine, which I was excited to stash away for later. And one of my best friends even gave me a beautiful necklace to wear on the wedding day. All in all, it was exactly what I expected for a bridal shower. And then came the gift from Stephanie. Now, before I go any further, I should mention that I had recently told Stephanie in passing that I was planning to go back to work after we got married. I had been staying home for a while, but I was itching to get back into my career. I didn't think much of it when I mentioned it, but I guess Stephanie did. I had been out of the workforce for a couple of years, and she seemed to think it was a pretty big deal. I don't know if it's because of her background. She's always been the traditional type, very much focused on the wife-at-home role, but whatever it was, she had clearly latched onto the idea. So there I was, sitting with everyone gathered around me. I was excited to see what was inside the gift from Stephanie. I had no idea that it was going to be the most awkward thing to ever happen at one of these events. When I opened it, I first noticed that it was a pretty large box, but it felt a little light. As I pulled off the wrapping paper, the title on the box was the first thing that caught my attention. The Ultimate Starter Kit for Housework. I was a little confused, but hey, it was from Stephanie, so I figured I'd roll with it. As I opened the box, I was stunned. Inside, there was a set of cleaning supplies, dish soap, sponges, some basic kitchen tools, and a bunch of random things you'd probably find in the house that needed to be cleaned. There was also a sheet of paper, and I realized it was a list of chores. I couldn't believe it. I honestly didn't know whether to laugh or be angry, but because I could even register what I was looking at, I heard someone giggle from the corner of the room. As I looked up, I saw the whole room of guests staring at me, and they all burst out laughing. I'm not talking about a few chuckles here and there. This was a full-on laugh fest with people clutching their stomachs and wiping away tears. I glanced around to see if anyone was as confused as I was, but nope. Everyone seemed to think this was hilarious. Stephanie was sitting there with a huge grin on her face, clearly pleased with herself, as if she had just delivered the punchline of the century. I was still trying to process the fact that this was the starter kit she had chosen to give me. On the paper, the chores were listed in categories like daily, weekly, and monthly. And it included things like laundry, scrubbing the floors, dusting the blinds, vacuuming the carpets. I couldn't believe it. I mean, I get it. Cleaning the house is part of the deal when you're married and running a home, but it was the sheer absurdity of the gesture that caught me off guard. Why on earth would you give someone a list of chores as a bridal shower gift? Everyone's laughter seemed to go on forever. It wasn't like anyone was making fun of me directly, at least not in a malicious way. It was more like they all saw the humor in the situation, and it was just one of these moments where you had to laugh because it was so over-the-top ridiculous. Still, I was caught off guard, and I tried my best to keep a smile on my face while internally I was boiling. In that moment, I couldn't help but feel humiliated. I could hear my mom and my friends chuckling along with the others, but I just felt uncomfortable. My dad, William, wasn't exactly laughing, but he looked like he was trying to keep it together. He's a pretty quiet guy. I could tell he didn't quite know how to react either. My mom, on the other hand, was enjoying the moment a little too much. She loves her little jokes, but even she could see how awkward it was for me. The laughter died down eventually, but there was still this lingering awkwardness in the air. People started moving around, talking amongst themselves, and there were a few "I don't know what to say" glances tossed my way. I tried to keep my cool, but I could feel the heat creeping up my neck. To be clear, I'm all for humor. I love a good joke and a bit of teasing here and there, but this was just too much. Stephanie thought it was the funniest thing ever, but I wasn't laughing. I wasn't even sure if I could ever look at that starter kit without feeling this pit in my stomach. The rest of the bridal shower went on, and I did my best to push through the weirdness of the moment. I think everyone tried to make me feel better after the gift-giving portion was over. There was cake and we had some more laughs, but I couldn't shake the feeling that Stephanie had crossed the line. Maybe she thought it was harmless, but it didn't feel that way to me. At first, I didn't know how to respond to her gift. I kept quiet, mostly because I didn't want to cause a scene at my bridal shower. But as time passed, I found myself getting angrier and angrier about it. I was angry that she assumed I was so clueless about life that I needed a kit to teach me how to be a good wife. It bothered me even more that my dad didn't say anything to stop her. He just sat there watching the whole thing happen. I decided I couldn't let it go. I wasn't just going to accept her thinking that she had the right to dictate what my life should look like, especially since I had spent so much time making my own choices. So I started thinking about how I could get back at her in a way that would show her how condescending and inappropriate her gift had been. I came up with an idea that I thought was both funny and fitting. If she was going to give me a starter kit for housework, I would return the favor by giving her something that would help her with the future. She was always talking about how much she loved giving advice and helping me, so I figured she'd appreciate a little advice herself. So I started researching assisted living facilities. I spent a couple of days compiling a list of options, including places that had great reviews and were known for their quality care. I even included a few brochures from well-rated facilities, just in case she needed them down the road. When I had everything together, I waited for the next family gathering. I didn't want to make a big deal out of it, but I felt like I needed to give her something back. It was more than just a little petty payback. It was a statement. I wasn't going to let her think she could give me unsolicited advice about my life without me giving her a little reminder of what it felt like to be on the receiving end of such helpful gestures. The day of the family gathering arrived, and I felt a mix of nervousness and excitement. I knew the moment would come soon enough, and I was trying to brace myself for the inevitable confrontation. When I arrived, everyone was mingling in the living room. I made small talk with a few relatives, trying to keep my mind occupied while I waited for the right moment. Stephanie was sitting on the couch with my mom and some other family members, laughing and chatting away. I casually walked over to where she was sitting, and I handed her the folder containing the list of assisted living facilities. I didn't say anything at first. I just handed it to her with a smile on my face. I thought it might be a light-hearted moment at first, but her reaction was not what I expected. Stephanie looked at the folder in confusion, then began flipping through the papers. Her expression quickly shifted from curiosity to surprise, and I could see the blood drain from her face as she processed what she was holding. For a moment I thought she might laugh, but the silence between us only grew thicker. The room had gone quiet by this point. Everyone was watching us, unsure of what was happening, but I could see the tension building. Stephanie finally closed the folder and looked at me, her face turning a little red. She told me I was being so disrespectful, that I was making a joke out of something serious. She said I didn't appreciate her help and that I was being childish for turning her gift into something petty. She went on about how she was just trying to guide me in my new role as a wife and how I was making things awkward for everyone. I stood there trying not to react. I could feel my heart racing, but I didn't back down. It wasn't the reaction I was hoping for, but at the same time it felt good to make her squirm a little. She had crossed the line. I wasn't going to just let it slide. Her defensiveness only made me feel more justified in what I'd done. The rest of the evening was uncomfortable. I tried to act normal, but I couldn't ignore the tension that hung in the air. Stephanie stayed quiet for the rest of the night, but I could see she was still upset. My dad tried to change the subject a few times, but it was clear that the mood had shifted and no one was really sure how to handle it. As much as I wanted to laugh it off, I couldn't help but feel a little guilty. But I also knew that Stephanie needed to understand that she couldn't push her outdated ideas onto me. It wasn't about housework or being a wife. It was about her trying to control how I lived my life. And I wasn't going to let her get away with it. So, AITA for giving my stepmom a list of assisted living facilities as a return gift for her helpful bridal shower present. Update 1. A few days after the event, my dad called me, sounding a bit exasperated. He'd spoken to Stephanie and wanted to know if I was planning to apologize. He said she felt like I'd humiliated her and didn't understand why I was being so stubborn about it. I could hear the disappointment in his voice, and it made me feel bad for a second, but only for a second. I wasn't sure how to respond. Stephanie hadn't acknowledged the real issue. It wasn't just the gift, it was the assumption that I should follow some traditional role because I was getting married. That's something I couldn't let slide. After hanging out with my dad, I thought about how to handle it. I wasn't about to apologize just to keep the peace. What had happened at the shower and then the gift exchange wasn't something I could just sweep under the rug. But part of me still felt a little guilty, like maybe I'd gone too far with the whole assisted living folder. Maybe there was a more mature way to deal with this. Still, I knew the bigger issue was that Stephanie had disrespected me, my career, and the choices I was making in my life. I wasn't going to back down. A week passed and then I got a call from Stephanie. She sounded calm, but I could tell from her tone that she wanted to talk through what had happened. I agreed to meet up at a coffee shop, hoping that maybe she'd have come to realize her mistake. I wasn't expecting a full apology, but I thought maybe she'd show some understanding. I wasn't prepared for what she said when we finally sat down together. Stephanie immediately started by telling me how hurt she was. She said that I had taken her gift too seriously and that she was only trying to help. She emphasized that she thought it was a funny and light-hearted way of offering advice about the role I was about to take on as a wife. She said it wasn't a big deal and I was overreacting. She even joked that she thought I'd find it useful, but I could tell it wasn't a joke to her. I sat there for a moment trying to process her words. To her, it was all light-hearted. To me, it felt like a big slap in the face. How could she not see how inappropriate and outdated her gift was? She didn't seem to realize that I had built my own life and career, and that I wasn't about to give that up just to follow some traditional path she imagined for me. I started to respond, and I could feel my frustration bubbling up. I explained to her that I wasn't trying to be ungrateful, but that the gift was offensive because it assumed I was going to drop everything and take on a role I hadn't signed up for. I wasn't about to just become the stereotypical housewife. I wanted to work and build my life with Nick, my fiancé, as partners, not follow some rigid script about how marriage should work. Stephanie looked surprised at first, but after a moment she started to defend herself again. She claimed she had no idea that I'd feel that way. She said she only wanted to teach me something that she thought was important, and tried to downplay the whole situation. She said that she was just helping me prepare for married life and that she thought it was a thoughtful gift. She was clearly frustrated I wasn't accepting her gesture in the way she thought I would. The conversation got a bit tense from there. I didn't back down, though. I told her I didn't need her advice on how to be a wife. I was perfectly capable of managing a home while also pursuing my career. She was quiet for a while after that, almost like she was processing what I said, but it didn't seem to sink in. I could tell she wasn't really getting it. I realized at that moment that Stephanie wasn't going to change her mindset. She might apologize in some way for the way I'd taken it, but she wasn't going to understand why what she did was problematic. It wasn't about her intentions. It was about the assumptions she had about what my role in life should be, based on her own ideas about marriage and women. I felt drained by the conversation and walked away feeling like I'd done everything I could to explain myself. But it wasn't going to lead anywhere. After that, things between us were strained. At family gatherings, it was uncomfortable. My dad kept trying to make us talk, but Stephanie would stay quiet or act like nothing had happened. I felt like I was the one holding on to the issue because I couldn't let go of how disrespectful it was. My mom, Heather, was supportive, but she could sense the tension. She tried to keep things neutral, but I could tell she didn't understand why I was still upset. Nick, my fiancé, could see the strain too. He kept telling me to let it go, but I wasn't ready. It wasn't about the gift anymore. It was about the underlying issue, the way Stephanie had tried to impose her outdated views on me, and how my dad didn't seem to get why I was upset. Then, about a month later, things took another turn. Stephanie reached out again. This time, she sounded a bit more humbled. She told me that she'd been thinking about our conversation, that maybe she hadn't handled things the right way. She said she realized she might have overstepped and apologized for making me feel that way. It wasn't a grand apology, but it was the closest thing to an acknowledgement that she understood why I felt disrespected. I still wasn't sure if I fully accepted her apology, but I appreciated that she'd at least recognized how I felt. We had a somewhat civil conversation after that, but things between us remained distant. It wasn't like we were going to suddenly be best friends or anything. I had to accept that this might be a relationship that would always have some tension. In the end, I've decided not to dwell on it too much. Stephanie and I might never fully get along, but I've learned that sometimes you just have to stand your ground when it comes to your own life choices. I don't regret calling her out for her assumptions, and I know I did what I had to do for myself. Now, I'm just trying to focus on moving forward, enjoying my wedding preparations, and not letting these family dynamics hold me back. Update 2. After things settled down with Stephanie, I thought we could all move forward, but of course, life had other plans. My relationship with Stephanie was still uneasy, but I had hoped the worst was over. I was focusing on planning my wedding with Nick and adjusting to the idea of our new life together. However, a few weeks after the conversation with Stephanie, something else happened that added fuel to the fire. It all started when my dad, William, invited us over for dinner one Saturday night. Nick and I were looking forward to a nice, quiet evening, but it quickly became clear that something was off. When we arrived, my dad seemed more nervous than usual. My mom was also there for some reason and was giving him worried looks. It didn't take long for me to realize that the elephant in the room was Stephanie. I had a feeling something was going to happen, and I wasn't sure I was ready for it. The dinner started off fine, but after a while, Stephanie turned to me with a big, almost forced smile on her face. She began talking about how excited she was about the wedding. She was giving off this vibe that I couldn't quite put my finger on, almost like she was trying too hard to be friendly. I didn't want to read too much into it, but then she casually dropped a bombshell. She mentioned how she had recently been doing some research and had found some fantastic ideas for marriage advice. She said that she had put together a list of things that would help me and Nick's relationship thrive, and she was eager to share it with me. At first I thought she was joking, but I quickly realized she wasn't. Stephanie, ever the self-appointed marriage expert, had gone and compiled a list of rules for Nick and me to follow after we got married. It wasn't just a couple of suggestions. It was a full-on list. She started reading it out loud at the dinner table, and I felt my face heat up with embarrassment. Some of the items on the list were so out of touch with reality that I couldn't help but feel furious. "Make sure you always cook a homemade dinner for Nick," she said. "Don't forget to give him space when he's tired, but also make sure you're giving him enough attention to show you care." She went on and on, offering advice that made me feel more like a child than a grown woman preparing for marriage. The worst part, my dad and mom were sitting there nodding along like it was completely normal. I couldn't believe it. My dad, who I thought would understand where I was coming from, didn't say anything. Heather just looked uncomfortable but didn't intervene. I felt like I was being cornered, like everyone was expecting me to just accept this. At that moment I had a choice. I could either let this go and pretend like everything was fine, or I could speak up. I wasn't going to let this slide, not again. I told Stephanie in a calm but firm tone that I didn't need advice on how to manage my marriage. I thanked her for her concern, but explained that Nick and I were perfectly capable of figuring things out on our own. I could see her face drop, and for a second I thought maybe she would back off, but instead she became defensive. She said I was being too stubborn for someone who isn't even married yet. I told Stephanie I didn't appreciate her constant attempts to impose her wisdom on me. I didn't need her to dictate how I should live my life or my marriage. Nick and I were adults, and we would navigate our relationship as we saw fit. Stephanie was visibly upset. She went silent for the rest of the dinner. My dad tried to act like nothing had happened, but it was clear that the situation had escalated. The evening ended awkwardly, and Nick and I left without much more said. As we were driving home, Nick asked me how I was feeling, and I burst into tears. I couldn't believe this was still happening. I thought after everything Stephanie would have backed off, but no, she was still trying to control every aspect of my life, even the parts that were supposed to be mine and Nick's. The fallout from the dinner lasted for a while. I tried to talk to my dad again, but he seemed unwilling to really understand why I was so upset. He said that Stephanie was only trying to help and that I should be more receptive to her advice. He didn't seem to see the deeper issue, which was that Stephanie was trying to control my choices under the guise of being helpful. The worst part was that Stephanie kept making passive-aggressive comments whenever we saw each other. She'd send me articles on marriage, household management, making it clear she still thought I wasn't prepared for the real world of being a wife. I couldn't understand why she couldn't just let go and accept that I wasn't going to live my life according to her standards. Eventually, I realized I couldn't keep going on like this. I needed to set some serious boundaries. So I decided to take a step back from Stephanie for a while. I told my dad that I would not be attending any more family dinners. If she was going to continue treating me like a child, I needed space to process everything and figure out how I could have a relationship with my dad without feeling like I was constantly being undermined by his wife. Update 3. A few weeks had passed since the awkward dinner, and I thought I had a solid grip on things. But then my dad, William, called one evening asking if we could talk. His voice sounded more serious than usual, and I had an uneasy feeling about what was to come. He told me he wanted to have a sit-down conversation with me about everything that had happened with Stephanie. He said he understood I was upset, but he thought it might help if I heard it from his side too. When I arrived at my dad's house, Stephanie was already there. She was sitting on the couch, looking a bit tense, but trying to act like everything was normal. As soon as I walked in, I could feel the tension in the air. My stomach twisted in knots. I had been trying to stay away from confrontations, but I knew this was something I couldn't avoid anymore. This was the moment where I'd either have to stand my ground or risk letting things slide again. We sat down. My dad immediately jumped in, saying how he felt bad about the tension between me and Stephanie. He told me he understood my frustration, but that I might have been a little too harsh. He said Stephanie was just trying to help and that I should be more grateful for all the advice she had been giving me. My dad even mentioned how she had been nothing but supportive of me, especially when it came to preparing for my marriage. I couldn't help but feel irritated as he spoke. It was as if he wasn't even hearing me. I'd explained everything clearly before, but now it felt like he was just brushing my feelings aside. Stephanie jumped in right after, with a sweet but condescending smile on her face. She told me she had only wanted to make sure I had everything I needed for a successful marriage, and that I should appreciate the effort she was putting into helping me become the best wife I could be. Her tone was so fake, and I could tell she didn't understand what I was really upset about. She wasn't hearing me at all. I tried to keep my cool, but inside, I was starting to boil. I looked at my dad and told him I wasn't upset because I didn't appreciate Stephanie's help. I was upset because she continually treated me like I couldn't make decisions for myself. I explained that her behavior wasn't just about offering advice. It was about constantly undermining me, and I felt like I wasn't being respected as an adult or as an individual. My dad didn't seem to fully grasp what I was saying. Instead, he started going on about how Stephanie had been there for me and how, in his eyes, I should be thankful. He even suggested that I take a step back and reconsider my position, saying that sometimes people in your life are just trying to offer guidance even if it feels uncomfortable. At that point, I was done. It felt like they were both ignoring how hurtful this situation had been. I looked at Stephanie, who still had that smug expression, and told her flatly that I didn't need her advice anymore. I told her I didn't want her to try to teach me how to be a wife or how to manage my relationship with Nick. I was perfectly capable of handling those things on my own. I was trying to keep calm, but Stephanie clearly wasn't pleased with what I said. Her smile faltered and she immediately started defending herself again. She said she had no idea why I was making such a big deal out of it and that I was being overdramatic. She continued to talk about how everything she had done for me was out of love and concern. I looked at my dad, hoping he'd understand, but he was quiet. I could tell he didn't want to cause more tension, but at that point, I didn't care. I wasn't going to keep letting Stephanie walk all over me. The conversation ended without any real resolution. My dad apologized for the tension, but said he thought I needed to be more open-minded about Stephanie's intentions. I told him I would do my best to keep things cordial, but I wasn't going to apologize for setting boundaries. Nick and I left the house feeling drained. I didn't feel like I had gotten my dad to truly understand, and I was frustrated that Stephanie had once again pushed her way into my life, but I knew I had done the right thing by standing up for myself. Couple of weeks later, the situation hasn't really changed. Stephanie still tries to offer unsolicited advice every time I see her. And my dad continues to think I'm being too hard on her. But I'm learning to set firmer boundaries. I don't want to keep fighting, but I also refuse to let Stephanie's overbearing nature become a regular part of my life. Stay tuned for more stories from our girl relationships.